Pedal to the Metal, a military thriller short, War of the Submarine. Written by R.G. Roberts. Narrated by A.J. Shuck. Every smoke trace on the horizon, every contact on watch will be investigated. If it turns out to be the enemy, we will hunt him down, and we will kill him. Lieutenant Commander Mush Morton, CO, USS Wahoo, SS 238, 1943. 10 January 2039, the Gulf of Nagasaki, the approaches to Sasebo, Japan. A normal submarine would have crept silently towards the enemy. On the outside, USS Darter was a normal submarine. She was a Zero class, one of the second largest classes of submarines in the U.S. Navy. Maybe the largest, now that a lot of Virginias had been sunk in the war. Darter's technical specs were nothing special. She was the same as her sisters, both those lying on the bottom and those still fighting. World War III, which pundits were already calling the War of the Submarine, had forced the American submarine force to adapt and overcome many challenges. That included rushing more Zeros into service every year than a pre-war industry base would have believed possible. Darter was one of the boats commissioned in the wild days building up to the war, when no one believed it would come to a fight, but every nation wanted territory. Back in 2035, just 4 years earlier, no one dreamt of an all-out war beneath the waves. She was just one of a dozen Zero-class boats, successors to the multi-mission Virginias, built to spy, fight, sneak, and finesse. The war hadn't changed that. Truth be told, Darter herself, from bow to stern, wasn't anything special. Her captain was something else. The Sea of Japan had been a hot pot ever since the Battle of La Perouse Strait 2 months earlier, but that was all right with Commander Kurt Kins. Sure, most sub-commanders would have flinched when being assigned a mission in this area, but he reveled in the challenge. Challenges were what Kurt Kins lived for. "Skipper, you with me?" His XO, Lieutenant Commander T. Korapati asked, leaning on the electronic chart table in USS Darter's packed control room. The odor in control was a bit ripe after 3 hours at Battle Station's torpedo. 20-plus people crammed into a small space, lined with electronic consoles, readouts, and equipment, whipped up a salty-smelling blend no one could escape. But that was life on an attack submarine. Kins had spent 16 years working his way up to command, and he relished the fact that Darter's particular smell was a weird mix of hot dogs and electric sparks. "All the way," Kins grinned. "Sorry, I was just distracted, thinking about the future, you know. Future like beyond the war, or future like tomorrow?" Kins shook his head. The idea of the war ending was alien, something only politicians discussed, and he sure as hell wasn't a politician. "Tomorrow, after we kick the Russians out of Japanese waters for good." In a better world, Kins supposed that the Japanese Navy, properly named the Japanese Naval Self-Defense Force, would have stood up to the Russian Federation Navy on their own. But this wasn't a proper world. This was a world where the world war everyone expected didn't happen. Instead, they found a different shooting war just when America started getting ready to square off against China over Taiwan. Luckily for America, though not so much for China, internal forces ripped the Chinese behemoth apart, engulfing China in a 4-way civil war for control over mainland China and Taiwan. Strategists sure as hell didn't see that coming. Kurt Kins didn't either. Commanding a boat stationed out of Sasebo, Japan, he'd been loading gear and begging for and borrowing sailors off every boat in sight to get into a fight that never happened. Until the American admiral tasked with aiding Taiwan went and sank an Indian submarine, embroiling the U.S. in a fight they hadn't expected or wanted. To be fair, tensions with India had already been high. India wanted the U.S. out of the Indian Ocean, because the seabed there was incredibly rich with resources that India didn't want anyone else exploiting. That included Australia, who had every right to be in their own backyard, and the U.S., whose navy was so far in bed with the Aussies that their destroyers might as well have been having each other's children. But that meant India was already mad, and that meant they didn't back down from a fight. And when that battle spiraled into an absolute ass-spanking for the U.S. Navy, including sinking the legendary carrier Enterprise, even the diplomats couldn't make peace work. Kins wasn't sure how hard they tried, not with France jumping in on India's side, and then Russia, never one to pass up a good fight, leaping for the opportunity to curb-stomp Japan and steal some nice territory. Yeah, that brought them the Northern Theater, where the Russians swept down from their northern naval bases, rolled through the Sea of Okhotsk, and conquered the southern Kuril Islands. Russia seized the islands separating the Sea of Okhotsk and the Pacific Ocean within a week, and by the time the Japanese Navy showed up, they were halfway through conquering the 19 underwater stations in the vicinity. Most of those were privately owned, but 9 belonged to the Japanese government, and all paid taxes to Japan for existing in the nation's inland waters. At first, everyone thought the Russians would stop there. After all, Russia and Japan had been disputing ownership of 4 Kuril Islands since 1855. Snatching them up at the first opportunity was almost tradition. But Russia wasn't done, and their newly revitalized navy, created by a military made rich when their mother nation discovered resources on the ocean floor in their own internal waters, met Japan's in the Battle of La Perouse Strait. Kins wished he could have been there for that battle. Maybe he could have made a difference. Instead, over half of Japan's navy went down. A British submariner stole the headlines, and the war got even harder. Which was what led USS Darter, SSN 850, to her present duties. Which weren't so bad, if Kins said so himself. Escorting, "Hell, Skipper, I'll settle for sinking a few more of them. I think kicking them out might be a bit above our pay grade," Teague said. "It pays to dream big. We won't be the best if we don't." Teague grinned. "We're already the best." "Damn straight." Commander Curtis Kins looked like a cross between the textbook naval officer and a stereotypical surfer guy, with a grin and drawl he blamed on his California roots and too many hours spent at the beach. Even Naval Academy discipline couldn't shake that out of him, and long hours spent underwater only made him more determined to regain his tan while on liberty. Both he and his wife were avid surfers, and when he wasn't on the water, he spent his time cheering her on in surfing competitions. Wartime cut down on his chances to find his thrills on the waves, but offered new opportunities just a little deeper. Kins knew that Darter was one of the most successful submarines in the service. In the 9 months since the war started, she had 11 military kills. That number looked even better, knowing that Darter didn't deploy until late June 2038. Before that, Grandma Madison, their squadron commander, kept them close to home, guarding against a Russian invasion that never came. So she averaged more than a kill a month, all with Kins in command. It didn't make him the top scorer in the U.S. Navy, but he was getting close. 4 down today takes us to 15, Teague said, as if he could read his mind. 2 more to go, and we can hit 17. That'll take us clean to the top, with only Ursula North to catch. Kins waved a hand. "I don't care what the Brits do. I just want to pass Rico Sivers." "We're on it, Skip," his weapons officer said from the fire control corner on the forward port side of control. "Those 2 Akulas never saw us coming." "That's because I've got the best goddamn crew in the Navy." Kins patted Weps on the shoulder. "Never doubt it, any of you." "We don't." Teague took a bow as watchstanders snickered. But someone should get on the horn and tell GW that we're going to clean out the bottom so well here that they'll squeak. Kins laughed. I think Admiral Lee might find it funny, but Commodore Madison's the traditional type. So let's keep our trap shut until we're on the top. Then no one will care what we say. Maybe a few more patrols like this will make Grandma Madison send that camera crew out on our next patrol, Teague leaned in to say. I know she keeps chirping about security, but it's a missed opportunity to show the public what we're doing out here. Yeah, Ken said. I'm going to double down on it once we're leading the pack. Maybe I can get Dalton to back me up. Rico Sivers hates my guts, so he won't help, but Dalton's moving up like a freight train, and he's everyone's fair-haired guy after the first battle of the Somme. Good idea. Better idea than you telling my wife about that nickname. Kins turned to eye his XO. She started addressing her emails to me with, Dear Evil. I'm pretty sure it's all your fault. Somehow. His XO's face went red with laughter, but Kins wasn't entirely sure blaming the shorter man was a jest. Lieutenant Commander Teague Korapati was the boat's most committed practical joker. He frequently turned pranks back on the division officers who tried to follow the time-honored sub-tradition of messing with the XO, and came up with his own inventive tricks, too. Darter was a happy boat. They hadn't known each other before Kins took command of Darter 9 months ago, but they hit it off right away. Kins wasn't sure his half-Irish, half-Indian XO hadn't come up with the nickname. When pressed, Teague said he could only dream of being so clever. Me, Skipper? I'd never talk to your wife behind your back. Cross my heart. Kins chuckled. Of course you wouldn't. You're too busy doing your job to ever do that. His relationship with his nickname was a love-hate thing. Sometimes he didn't mind getting tagged with Evil Knievel after Darter's first wartime patrol and a couple of daredevil stunts. It gave him latitude to be creative. And, well, if it spread to the sub-community and made Commodore Madison give him better patrol sectors, things could be worse. So, as long as none of his crew used it in his hearing, Kins pretended he didn't know what they called him behind his back. At least at 6 foot even, with blonde hair, green eyes, and that surfer's frame, Kins was photogenic enough to weather whatever publicity the Navy sent at him. He had a feeling that nickname was going to go fleet-wide after this mission, and he really didn't mind. Teague snickered. Of course I am. I'm the soul of innocence. Uh-huh. Too clever by half, that's what you are. I take that as a compliment. Teague cocked his head. But what do you think of these other two anyway? Speaking of my job and all, I thought I might call your attention to the fact that though we just sank 2 Akulas, the next 2 are a Husky followed by a Yazan. Wonder if they'll be smarter than the last 2. Kins scratched his chin. Great question. Tradition says the Ruskies are supposed to be the varsity, but those chonkers were pretty slow on the uptake. We haven't gotten a Yazan yet, though, have we? Kins asked. No, sir. They're older than the Huskies, but they supposedly are what our Seawolves were supposed to be. The sub-killing sub to kill all subs. Ursula North got 2 at the Battle of La Perouse Strait. John Dalton got 1 in September, Webb said helpfully. No one else from the Alliance has yet. Kins perked up. Yazans were the top of the line for Russian submarines, like the Seawolves that the U.S. stupidly stopped building too many years ago. Subs built to hunt and sink other submarines. And Huskies were missile boats, brand spanking new and the best the Russians had. A small voice in his mind worried that Darter might not measure up. But Ceros were the newest and best submarines America had. Darter had commissioned just 3 years earlier in mid-2035, and Kins was only her 3rd captain. Yet the Ceros were built to be multi-mission submarines, good for infiltration, spying, special operations, and pretty much anything the Navy might need them for. No one expected to need them for war, which was why they were sinking in droves, and Kins resorted to slightly unorthodox tactics. He knew the statistics. 1 out of every 3 American submarines wasn't coming home. Even worse, most of them weren't killing the enemy before they went to the bottom. That meant he had a duty to be better than everyone else. His eyes met Teague's. Neither of the other 2 Russian subs was in firing range, but they would be soon. It was time to do what Darter did best. Less than an hour earlier, Darter had spooked the 2 Akulas by racing into the narrow waters between Ukushima and Hirado Islands at speeds no sane sub-commander would try. Kins counted on his own countermeasures to spoof the torpedoes fired at them, and had been a good chance to take. Darter got in close and reamed both Russian submarines almost before they knew what hit them. 4 kills made for a good day. The 2 subs plus 2 Russian frigates sunk earlier that morning. Neither stood a chance, not with Darter lying in wait. Even better, Kins hadn't had to use up more than 1 torpedo on each of them, which was a good thing when he was this far from resupply. The next 2 might be harder to kill. The boats were more advanced, and they had warning. They knew he was here. But slowing down never entered Kins's mind. "How far back is the battle group?" he asked his navigator. USS George Washington, a 46-year-old but still precious aircraft carrier, and her escorts were on their way to relieve the beleaguered Japanese Navy. It was Darter's job to clear the way of annoying Russian submarines. 40 nautical miles in closing, the lieutenant replied. "Then let's get this party started. Range to the Husky? 14,000 yards, with a closure rate of almost 80 knots. His fire control supervisor volunteered the next bit on her own. "Minute and a half to preferred firing range, Captain." "Thanks, Senior Chief." Kins didn't like firing his torpedoes outside of 10,000 yards. The manufacturer claimed that the effective range on the Mark 48s was over 15 miles, or 30,000 yards. But Kins had never heard of anyone trying that in combat conditions. He only had 10 torpedoes left, and the one thing he didn't want to do was waste them. Besides, the Mark 48 Sea Bass was slow. He had to get in close or his prey might run away. Rumor said new torpedoes were on the horizon, but as far as Kins was concerned, they might as well be unicorns until they showed up on his submarine. "Huh, that's funny." Kins didn't turn. "My wife send me another email, did she?" That made Teague laugh. No. The Yazan is hanging back. They've dropped speed like they're torn between running and closing with us. They're just sitting there. That is weird. Now he turned to look at the plot, frowning. A cold chill ran up Kins's spine as he watched the second enemy sub slow. Teague's assessment was spot on. What was this dude up to? Slowing now was a bad tactic. Darter already had him dialed all the way in. Hanging back just removed the advantage of mutual support from their fellow. Then again, maybe he didn't trust his friend. That could be nice for Darter. Kins shook himself. There'd be time enough to figure that out later. First, he had to deal with the Husky. It was a bigger threat to the battle group, even if the Yazan was more likely to sink Darter. Huskies were fast, quiet, and dangerous, and stuffed to the gills with ship-killing missiles. That Husky could ruin the George Washington battle group's day with a few missile launches. Kins didn't want to think about what it might do with a Yazan to help. That Yazan had 32 torpedoes, plus 10 missiles and vertical launch tubes. It was his job to stop them before either could shoot. 1 minute to range, the fire control chief said. Start your corkscrew pattern, Nav, Kins ordered without thinking. As far as he knew, no one else went into combat with their submarine dancing in a fast-moving cone of random course changes, but it had worked for him so far. It complicated his fire control solutions, but it also kept him from getting hit. The only downside was that it kept him from using Darter's top speed of 57 knots. Making multiple fast turns at that speed would shear her sound-absorbent tiles right off, so he had to limit his speed to a touch over 40 knots. Fortunately, His enemies seemed eager to close too, and the Husky barreled towards Darter almost as quickly. Who would shoot first? It was like an underwater game of chicken, only with high explosives. "Corkscrew pattern started, sir," the diving officer reported. Kins nodded. "Very well." The seconds ticked by, and yet the Yazan still hadn't sped up. "I guess there are cowards in every navy." Teague scratched the stubble on his chin. "Maybe that's the Ruski version of Commander Harney over there, and we aren't the only ones having problems with COs cracking under pressure." "Now that's a happy thought," Kins grinned. It would certainly make his job easier. "Solution ready," Webb said. Teague was by his side in a flash. "Ship ready. Shoot tubes 1 and 2. 2 fish away, running hot, straight, and normal." "Very well." Man, Kins hoped those mythical new torpedoes were faster when they reached the fleet. The Mark 48 needed forever and a day to reach the enemy, even from 10,000 yards. 3 minutes was a lifetime in this game. "Whoever is driving that thing must be sleeping off a hangover," he said to Teague when his XO crossed control to stand next to him again. "Can we be lucky enough to get 2 Russian COs off their B team?" Teague asked. "One hangs back and the other one forgets to shoot? This is weird." "We can be academic about it after we sink them, XO." Teague snickered. "Aye, sir." Kins's eyes did flick to the plot, though. The Husky-class submarine, the one he'd targeted, had turned right away, but the enemy boat didn't get torpedoes in the water until over a minute ticked by. By then, Darter's weapons were in a stern chase. Facing away from the American sub was about the worst firing position the Russian could be in, and it showed. "Launch countermeasures on my mark." Ken's eyes snapped to the plot, watching the Russian torpedoes arc towards his submarine. "Chief of the boat, full rise on the planes. Make your depth 400 feet. Full rise, make my depth 400 feet aye. Countermeasures, stand by. Mark." Kins waited until the deck started sloping upwards to give the order, knowing that his timing had to be perfect. Russian torpedoes didn't have the best targeting ability ever manufactured, but the suckers were fast. Way faster than his. But not as fast as they might have been. Despite persistent intelligence reports of the Russians fielding a 300-knot torpedo, these only clocked in at 70. The speaker to his right chirped, "Khan, sonar. Our torps are in final acquisition." The Russian torps missed by a mile, while both of Darter's smashed into the Husky-class attack submarine with little fanfare. The navigator had to do a bit of fancy driving to avoid going right through the mess of bubbles and secondary explosions that marked the Russians' grave, but soon enough they were out the other side. "Good job, everyone," Kin said. "Now let's find the other one." But when he glanced down at the plot, all that showed was the blinking upside-down V of a contact lost. He leaned into the centerline speaker and control, pressing the button hard enough to make his finger hurt. "Sonar Khan, where's our last friend?" "Captain, I've lost track on the Yazan due to the noise in the water," Sonar said. "I can tell you where they were a minute ago, and I've put a datum in the system to show where they ought to be now." "Very well," Kins bit back a curse. Maybe this guy was better than he thought. Or just a coward who slowed down even further. Every submariner knew that speed was the key to detection. If you went fast, you got heard. Kins just weighed the advantages of going fast, like the ability to dodge and surprise his opponents, against the advantages of stealth. He found stealth lacking. "You want to slow down until we figure out what that guy's doing?" It was a very un-Teague-like suggestion to make, and might have been the right thing to do under other circumstances. "Nah," he waved a hand. "We'll find her on the fly." Darter was out in front of the battle group to cover George Washington and her escorts as they attempted to break through the Russian forces that were poised to hit Sasebo. The faster he could get this done, the sooner he could go look for other prey. Kins had heard there was great hunting near the French colonies in the southern Pacific, and he was eager to find out. Besides, there were records to break. Ursula North, that prickly Brit with a pole shoved up her you-know-what, who had called him an overgrown, overdrugged child the one time they met, had sunk 6 combatants in one afternoon at the Battle of La Perouse Strait. The news media wouldn't stop talking about Lady North, no matter how much she ignored them. It probably made her more popular. But Kins didn't care about that. He cared about her touch in a submarine, the way she could bend the world to her will and kill the enemy. Kins could do better. Hell, he'd equal it today if he sank this Yazan. Then he'd jump straight to the goddamn top. Rico Sivers on Guam was at the top of the American scorecard, and Kins wasn't too proud to admit he hated Rico's guts. What started with a prank war between boats in their division officer days quickly got out of control. Nowadays, Rico's held Kins responsible for one of his best friends ending up in the hospital. The man sure could hold a grudge after almost 15 years. Kins sure hadn't meant for that to happen, and he'd apologized twice. He'd thought the waters clear between them, only for Rico to shame him in front of his peers years later at the submarine commander's course. Rico Sivers could go bury himself in obscurity for all Kins cared. But damn, Rico was at the top of the American scorecard for warships sunk, with a total of 12 ships sunk. As long as the Rat hadn't sunk anyone during his current patrol on Guam, an older Virginia-class boat, today's efforts put Kins past him, and sinking this Yazan would give him a nice safety margin, with only 1 kill left to go until he equaled Ursula North. "We need good examples," he muttered to Teague. "Sure, I'm colorful and I like risks, but that just means the media will like me enough to focus on me instead of that slick French fucker Rochambeau." "You got a press tour on the mind, Skipper?" "We'll hit the top with that Husky. If we can get over Ursula North on this patrol, even Commodore Madison will have to listen to us." Kins licked his lips, trying to still his racing heart. "This isn't only my ego talking. The war has kicked the crap out of us so far. It's made American submariners look like chumps. We need to show them we aren't." "You don't have to tell me twice. Even if we use 2 torpedoes on the Yazans, we'll still have 8 in the weapons room. I intend to use every damn one of them." Teague mimed shooting with his fingers. "Let's shoot 'em up, Evil." Kins laughed. "Let's find this sucker first." Despite his light tone and focus on future plans, instinct was starting to send a weird tingling feeling up Kins's spine. He leaned over the speaker to his right. "Sonar Con, any luck with finding that Yazan?" "Negative, sir. It's like they dropped into a hole somewhere." "Unless it's a hole I put them into, I'm not really into that." Kins winked at his XO. Teague just rolled his eyes. "Since you don't want to slow down, you want to come right to close with their last known position?" Teague asked. "Sounds like a plan. Do it." Darter swept onwards, angling right and rolling along at 42 knots. The other Russian was out there, Kins knew it. He just had to be ready. "Make tubes 1 and 3 in all respects, including opening the outer doors," he said. That should let them get a shot off no matter what happened. Not that he'd ever had an enemy outshoot him. Kins was the master of underwater duels. "Tubes 1 and 3 ready in all respects," his weapons officer replied. "Outer doors open." "Very well. Sonar, Con, update?" "Still zilch and nada, Captain." Kins frowned. Darter covered 1,400 yards a minute. They'd gone over 4 nautical miles since losing the Yazan. Something wasn't right. He crossed his arms. "This is one canny customer." "If you still don't want to slow down, maybe it's time to think about changing the equation somehow?" Teague frowned. "Like what?" "We could stream the tail, or we could go active and—" "Con sonar, torpedo in the water! Torpedo in the water bearing 032! Shit, second torpedo in the water, bearing 033! His sonar supervisor's voice was suddenly high with fear, but another operator overrode him before Kins could reply. New contact, track 7058, moving from left to right, range 9,000 yards. Left full rudder, all ahead flank, Kins ordered. The contact was right in front of them. Too damned close. But he could work with this. He had to. Snapshot tube 1, bearing... Con, sonar, torpedo speed, approximately 280 knots! The last thing Kurt Kins saw was Teague Korapati's stark white face. He didn't know how to apologize to his friend, or to his crew, or even if he should. They'd fought the good fight, but torpedoes this fast weren't supposed to exist, and this one was going to kill them in less than a minute. Swallowing, he shrugged. I guess 16 kills is going to have to be good enough, he said. RFS Kazan, K561. The Russian submarine slowed as her torpedoes hit Darter. None of her crew expected Darter to get a shot off in the precious few seconds they had. The American captain would have had to be superhuman. 2 good hits, the sonar watch reported on board the Russian submarine, less than 5 nautical miles away. She is going down. Kazan was indeed a Yazan, and not a new one. Kurt Kins would have probably been insulted to know that he'd been sunk by a submarine commissioned the same year he started college. But Kazan was still a fine boat with an excellent crew. Both had weathered convulsions, regrowth, and finally, a professional resurgence in their navy and their nation. It had taken longer than anyone wanted to admit to get Kazan combat ready, but here she was, making her mark. Very good. Captain 3rd Rank Katarina Revnik squared her shoulders and said nothing, listening on the sonar speakers as Darter cracked into 3 pieces and sank to the bottom, victim of the mythical 300-knot torpedo so few Russian submarines carried. Rumors of a supercavitating torpedo had been around for over 30 years. Prototypes had been fielded, but such torpedoes never made it to the fleet. Until now. Very few boats carried them because the torpedoes were still a little persnickety. Maintained incorrectly, they failed to fire or lost their guidance systems. Either problem could kill the firing submarine faster than the enemy. Unfortunately for the Americans, Kazan had a full maintenance team and was thus one of the lucky few who could carry the Skval torpedoes. Their Husky-class consort, Laika, had carried the older Futyar torpedoes, of which the Russian Navy still had many. They were more reliable, but slower. Katarina had a dozen of them in her weapons room, too. But she had launched 2 Skvals today, even knowing their accuracy still left much to be desired. You had to shoot them close, she realized. Close enough to be in danger from the enemy submarine, which made it a real challenge. If you fired from too far away, the enemy might get a shot off, and then your submarines would die together. Never a good option for a patriotic Russian. Katarina loved her country. Russia was far from perfect, but she was the only nation Katarina had. Is the captain all right? The navigator whispered. Captain Lieutenant Antonova was the 3rd-ranking officer on Kazan, right after Katarina. And if anyone had a right to ask, it was her. Tension rippled across the top of Katarina's shoulders. The top-secret torpedoes weren't the only thing on board Kazan that didn't work right. Captain 1st Rank Ovechkin had dithered, paced, and fidgeted. Then, in the end, he refused to make the decisions that mattered. Katarina frowned, trying to ignore the stares from every watchstander in the attack center. She hadn't quite relieved her captain. He'd finally succumbed to her urging and fled to his cabin, muttering for her to take care of things. I am sure he is fine. Even in the days of democracy, There was not another proper answer for a Russian. Was the Russian Federation a democracy? Katarina wasn't sure, but she would fight for it until the death. Of course. Antonova returned her attention to her console, nodding. Katarina stared at the tactical plot, chewing the ends of her hair. She couldn't understand what set Ovechkin off. The setup was perfect. The foolish American kept right on sprinting even after they clearly lost contact with Kazan, waltzing right into firing range. Katarina's pointed recommendation to the twitching and shaking Captain Ovechkin ensured that they made a radical and fast course change right after Laika was torpedoed. That meant they weren't where the American thought they were when the fool finally started looking. They'd had every advantage. Why did Ovechkin crumble? There was no way to know. Ovechkin had a reputation as a commander who thought first and acted carefully. But today he'd been paralyzed. She'd heard about submarine COs falling apart, but she'd never thought it would happen on Kazan. She'd served as Captain Ovechkin's second-in-command for 6 months, and they'd killed numerous Japanese surface ships together. He'd never so much as flinched. They'd never faced a submarine, though. Was that different? Katarina thought about it for a moment before deciding that she didn't care. Ovechkin was supposed to be better than this. They all had to be. This was not an exercise. Russia's future was at stake. She could rise to be a superpower again only if her military was the best in the world, and Katarina was determined to do her part. Yes, she would do whatever she had to, even this. Katarina shook herself and waited for the explosions to die down. It took several moments. It was a pity that Ovechkin would get credit for her first kill. "What next, ma'am?" Captain Lieutenant Antonova asked. "Continue the normal watch." She was pleased that her voice was steady. "We will keep an eye out for American battle group that intelligence tells us wishes to enter the Sea of Japan. Perhaps we will have more chances to test the Skval torpedoes." No one smiled, but at least the tension in the control room seemed to ease a little. Kazan settled into her routine quickly, but that didn't stop the other officers shooting curious looks at Katarina. They all knew that Ovechkin would freeze up a second time. This kind of thing never went away. They all knew that could get them killed. Katarina resisted the urge to hug her arms to her chest. She knew what she had to do, but that didn't make duty any more comfortable. "Call me if anything happens." She forced herself to take a deep breath and add, "or if the captain comes out of his cabin." She didn't think he would. Once Ovechkin got over his panic attack, he'd be ashamed. And she wouldn't push him, not now. Getting back to Vladivostok would take several days. Gaining permission to head back to port might take even longer. If Ovechkin hadn't come out by then, she'd go get him. Until then, she would leave him in peace. That was the least she could do. Once they got home, Katarina was going to have to destroy his career. 25 March 2039, Perth, Australia. Future admirals would quietly delete Kin's last line from the VDR record they provided to the fleet. Since the late 2020s, video data recorders had been installed in American submarines' control room. They functioned like the nautical equivalent of a black box, surviving even the worst sinkings. The VDR record provided a close-up view of the tactics employed right up to a submarine's death, and was the best training tool available for serving or prospective commanding officers. The last 4 hours recorded by the VDR were automatically uploaded to the cloud if a sub sank. Getting more than that required recovering the submarine itself, or at least the VDR. Admiral Hamilton, Commander Submarine Forces, was the one who decided that Kin's little farewell to his ego was unnecessary. She left it in the official record, but when Commodore Madison, christened Grandma by Kurt Kins because she always warned him to take more care in his tactics, sent the video out to the fleet, that last line was cut out. Instead, captains like Commander Alex Coleman saw the helpless look exchanged between the captain and the XO before darter shattered and water poured in. The VDR stopped working abruptly and uploaded to the submiss subsunk buoy when Darter passed beyond her own crush depth. Kins, Korapati, and their crew had been dead for over 2 minutes by that point. Alex, who sat with Commander Teresa O'Canis and Commander Tommy Sandifer to view the video, sat back in his chair and scraped a hand over his face. They were all in Teresa's cabin on USS Douglas because it was the largest and most secure place they could find to watch the video. But damn if he didn't want some privacy right now. Watching another American submarine die always kicked the life out of Alex, made him think about how it would feel to be in the seat when a torpedo came roaring in and you couldn't do a damned thing about it. Yet he kept agreeing to watch the VDR recordings. Why? Was it because he wanted to be better, to do better? Hell, he commanded the oldest attack boat in the fleet. As long as he was stuck in Jimmy Carter, no way was Alex Coleman going to get a shot at something like this. That was reckless as all fuck, Teresa said. She commanded USS Douglas, the Virginia-class submarine they sat aboard right now. Teresa was by far the most successful of the three captains, and her Hispanic features were creased by a frown. Racing forward to a foe when you have no idea where they are? Tommy Sandifer, formerly of USS Georgia, nodded. I know getting in close is the best bet with our slow torpedoes, and I don't like to speak ill of the dead, but damn, man, not a great move by Kins. Tommy's eyes were still shadowed by grief. When his boat went down 4 months earlier, he lost almost 2/3 of his crew and had been lucky to survive himself. I think speed has its uses. Alex chewed his lip. It worked well against the Husky, but you can't sprint into the unknown, particularly against a Yazan. Am I the only one worried about those damn torpedoes? Teresa asked. They exist. For real. Russia's got a 300-knot torpedo. Looks like they clocked 280 to me, Alex said automatically. Teresa punched him in the arm. Shut up, pedant. Alex chuckled. Anyone get off? Tommy whispered. They all sobered. No way, Alex swallowed. First off, Commodore Madison would have told us. Secondly, unless you're practically at the surface when one of those torps hits, I think you're screwed. Everyone thought you were crazy for that hit the roof when a torpedo comes at you philosophy at sub school, but it worked out for me, Tommy grimaced. Partly, at least. I don't think you can ever save whoever's where the torpedo hits. Explosions are going to explode and all, Teresa said. But at least warheads are getting smaller as torpedoes get faster. Small silver lining. I wonder how long-range those fast torps are. Alex scratched the back of his neck. If they're short-ranged, forget it. You can't fire the Mark 48 from far enough out to hit anyone. They've got us in a freaking vice, Teresa said. Come in close and risk getting hit by one of those things, or shoot from far away and don't hit the enemy at all. Tommy shook his head. What a time to be a Russian submarine captain. 26 March 2039. The Sea of Japan. Captain First Rank Ovechkin was quietly relieved of command. The investigation was promptly sealed, and the crew advised not to talk about the incident if they wanted to continue in the naval service. Captain Second Rank Katarina Revnik assumed command of Kazan, and after a quick maintenance period, during which she dutifully reported on the performance of the Shkval torpedoes, the attack submarine got underway again. This time, there would be no freezing up, as the captains of an American cruiser and guided missile submarine would find out. Katarina put them on the bottom without blinking. Since her superiors had indeed credited her with killing Darter, a sub she knew by name thanks to American news coverage and her own excellent language skills, she now had 3 kills to her name. She might be Russia's junior submarine commander, but it was a good start. 7 April 2039. The White House, Washington, D.C. Amelia Kins regretted teasing her husband with that nickname, now that she held the blue and white starred ribbon in her hands. Her sons couldn't stop staring at it. They'd been slow to accept the loss of their father, but 3 months later they were eager to learn what a hero he had been. The media presentation at the Medal of Honor ceremony only made them bounce in their seats. It wasn't that Amelia was against people seeing Kurt as a hero. God knew he'd always been her hero. She just wanted him back so much it hurt. Listening to people talk about his bravery and his steadfast courage when they'd never even met him made her want to scream. "Are you all right?" She turned, blinking tears out of her eyes, to face Admiral Winifred Hamilton. The Navy's senior submariner was about her height and was a surprisingly beautiful woman, with dark hair pulled back in accordance with Navy regulations. Her eyes were focused on Amelia. "I will be," she sighed. "Today, it's hard. I can only imagine." Hamilton squeezed her arm. "If the press gets to be too much, or your boys need a break, I got a White House intern to fork over a room for you to hide in." "I think I'll be all right." Amelia looked out across the White House lawn. It was full of lights and red, white, and blue banners. Flags for the Navy, their home state of Iowa, and Submarine Squadron 31 swayed gently in the cool wind. Early April in D.C. was a terrible time for an outdoor ceremony, but no one asked Amelia her opinion. If they had, she would have told them to hold the ceremony on a California beach. Still, the White House was perfectly turned out. The grass was neatly trimmed, and every white chair on the lawn somehow still stood in straight lines, despite the ceremony having been over for 2 hours. The media mostly kept to the outskirts, taking notes and being respectful of her space. She'd talked to a few reporters earlier, the ones Freddie Hamilton arranged for, but since then they'd left her alone. Amelia was grateful for that. Her boys were still off to the right, listening to Commander Rico Sivers tell a story about her husband and the silly things they'd done together when they were young. Amelia smiled sadly, approaching. Sivers knelt with one knee in the grass, heedless of how his dress uniform was getting stained, facing her twin 6-year-olds with a smile and talking with his hands. They were engrossed, grinning for the first time in months, and Amelia felt her heart grow 10 sizes. "Thank you for being here, Rico," she said, taking his hand as he rose. "I don't know what we'd have done without you." "You'd have been all right," Rico replied, "but I'm glad I could help. Kurt and I didn't always see eye to eye, but damn, I'll miss him. Even his pranks." Amelia surprised herself with a laugh. "I won't miss the way he milked April Fool's Day to death. I never could decide which one I hated most. The 4th of July poppers under the toilet seat, the time he put food coloring in my toothpaste, or the chocolate cotton balls. But he never stopped." She shook her head. "I suppose that was part of his charm." "Never stopping was how we fought, too," Commander Rico Sivers replied. "May Kurt, his crew, and Darter rest peacefully on eternal patrol." Amelia Kins blinked tears out of her eyes and pulled her boys close. Later that afternoon, USS Utah, a Virginia-class submarine, joined Darter in the halls of the deep. More than half her crew would join Kurt Kins' sailors on eternal patrol before the others were rescued. 8 more American submarines would join them, before a maverick submarine captain picked up Kurt Kins's mantle and made it his own. If you've enjoyed this short story and aren't reading the series War of the Submarine, click on over to Amazon to check out the series. And while you're there, if you don't mind leaving a review, it would mean the world to me. Reviews are like gold to independent authors like me. This is a short story in the universe of the War of the Submarine. War of the Submarine continues to follow Alex and the crew of USS Kansas as they find additional trouble, and then into the opening acts of World War III. While the first several books of War of the Submarine are available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook, you can almost always read ahead in the serial version. Click on over to my Ream if you want to be the first to read this exciting series. Ream is like Patreon, but optimized for readers and authors. I post all my works there first, as well as some exclusive pieces you can't get anywhere else. World War I was the war of the battleship. World War II was the war of the aircraft carrier. World War III will be the war of the submarine. Undersea technology has changed the world, and every nation wants territory. No one wants war, or plans for it, but a series of unrelated incidents, mix-ups, and greedy grabs for ocean floor real estate escalate straight into a shooting war that no one knows how to stop. One that engulfs the Indian Ocean and threatens to spill out towards the rest of the world. Old alliances are overturned and new ones form, with the Grand Alliance of the US, UK, and Australia facing off against Russia, India, and France. Caught in a three-way civil war, China is on the outside looking in, but minor nations are forced to pick sides in the war no one expected to come, and no one knows how to win. For his part, Commander Alex Coleman is pretty sure that heroes don't explode coffee creamer fireballs and hijack cruise ships. But let's not talk about that where the admirals can hear. One already hates him, and that's quite enough. He's also certain they don't end up with a boat old enough to drink and a crew a few beers short of a six-pack. No one expects him to make a difference until the enemy gets a vote. Conventional submariners rarely make history. Submarines that make history rarely survive. R.G. Roberts is a veteran of the U.S. Navy, currently living in Connecticut and working as a manufacturing manager for a major medical device manufacturer. While an officer in the Navy, R.G. Roberts served on 3 ships, taught at the Surface Warfare Officer School, and graduated from the U.S. Naval War College with a master's degree in strategic studies and national security, with a concentration in leadership. She is a multi-genre author and has published in military thrillers, science fiction, epic fantasy, and alternate history. She rode horses until she joined the Navy. Ships aren't very compatible with high-strung jumpers, and fenced, with swords, in college. Add in the military experience and history degree, and you get an A+ anatomy for a fantasy author. However, since she also enjoyed her time in the Navy and loves history, you'll find her in those genres as well. You can find R.G. Roberts' website at www.rgrobertswriter.com. From there, you can join her newsletter. Joining the newsletter will get you a free novella or short story set in either the War of the Submarine or Age of the Legacy universes. Or both, if you like both genres. Newsletters are a once-a-month affair, so there won't be a ton of spam in your inbox, but you'll be the first to hear about sales, get sneak peeks of new writing, and get to read free short stories from time to time, too. R.G. Roberts is also one of the authors trying the newfangled site known as Ream. It's like Patreon, but made for authors and readers, and especially for superfans. There you will have access to exclusive first looks at all of her works, including early access to chapters of novels, short stories, and more. You can find her Ream at www.reamstories.com R.G. Roberts Writer. This has been Pedal to the Metal, a military thriller short, War of the Submarine. Written by R.G. Roberts. Narrated by A.J. Shuck. Copyright 2023 by Robin Roberts. Production copyright by Robin Roberts.